These 5 classroom-wide practices that Ellen is going to be talking with us about can be used in the entire classroom and can have a significant impact on all children's behavior and the overall atmosphere of the classroom. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to just give a couple of quick webinar tips. Ellen, if you'll go to the next slide for us.
All right.
It's okay. If you're having any trouble viewing the webinar today, or you're seeing it's glitching or lagging, a few things that you can try is to close all of your programs and browsers to maximize the bandwidth. I do realize that's really uncomfortable. I have a lot of support windows and browsers on my computer up as well, but we have found that it does help some. You can also try to exit and re-enter the webinar if you're experiencing a lag, and it won't wait for me to let you back in. We have turned off the chat feature, but if you have questions for our panelists, which is mostly going to be Ellen today, please make sure to use the Q&A feature and for any questions that you have and for technical assistance, and we will either answer them within the Q&A itself or we will hold them until the end. And then finally, the recording and resources will be shared with you and sent via email either later today or early tomorrow. So you will get the PowerPoint and resources that Ellen talks about today as soon as they are ready. And with that, I will take one quick moment to introduce our Pyramid Pieces team. My name is Jennifer Harris. I am the Pyramid Model Coordinator for the District Support Team at Pyramid Pieces. I have with us Nicole Hudgens, who is our behavior, not just kidding, she's the Program Implementation Specialist, Program-Wide Coach. And then we have Ellen Andrews, who is our Behavior Specialist, who you'll be hearing from today. We also have Carrie Kennegeiser with us. She is our Project Manager, Principal Investigator for South Carolina Partnerships for Inclusion, and we're happy to have her today, and she'll have some answers or some information for you guys later about Summer University. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Ellen to talk about our 5 classroom-wide practices.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. All right, thank you for being here this afternoon. Again, I'm Ellen Andrews, and I am the Behavior Specialist with the Behavior Support Network. How are you feeling today? Are you feeling mindful? I know there's a lot of things going on in our lives, especially at the end of the school year, and your brain is going a million miles an hour about those things you have to do. Or, you know, we had a little silence to begin with. Are you feeling mindful, present in the moment, and aware? So let us take a deep breath together and just relax. And for the next hour, let's try to stay present as we explore the 5 classroom-wide practices. All right, so you may be wondering, what is this Behavior Support Network? This is something you might not have heard of. We are part of the Pyramid Model Program-Wide Implementation process. It's a network of behavior specialists, currently 2. It's myself, I work with the school districts, and then I have a counterpart who works in the community childcare programs. And our goal is to support teachers who are struggling with challenging behaviors in their classroom. We want to empower you to think of new ways to work with children. We work with teachers, administrators, and families. What we don't do is work with children. Instead, we're going to empower you to work with children. And so we're here to support and guide you on your journey as you look for the root causes of behavior and how to address them. We're going to tap into your knowledge of the children in your classrooms because you're the expert on what children are doing in your classrooms, and you know their personalities and their strengths and their challenges. We're going to grow your capacity to think about challenging behaviors differently. In many ways, we're going to look at challenging you to think about ways you can impact children's behaviors in the classroom, try things maybe you haven't tried before. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we're here to really listen to what's happening in your classroom, listen to what you've tried, listen to your concerns. You know, the more we talk about things, challenging behaviors really takes collaboration. And so we're here to help collaborate with you, with your behavior coach through this process. We want to help you see the function of behavior and the reason why children are doing the things they're doing. It's not always obvious or easy to see these things. And so the Behavior Support Network wants to help you in that process. And we're also going to enter into a coaching relationship with you where we'll help you learn to examine your teaching practices. We're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to support you. We're here to cheer you on when you try new things, and we want to celebrate those successes because growth takes nurturing and time. As we look at bringing on families into a team process, working with challenging behaviors, because they know their child best, they know the full history of their child, and we can't do this work without them. We can't have behaviors change unless we're working together as a team. And because of all your hard work, children are going to be able to grow. They're going to be able to gain new social and emotional skills. And when they have those skills, challenging behaviors are going to be reduced because they're going to have skills to meet their needs in other ways besides turning to those challenging behaviors. And in the end, we hope that fewer children are suspended or expelled from early childhood classrooms. All right, so as the behavior support specialist, I work with districts on program-wide implementation of pyramid model, and that's why you're all here. You are all part of that program-wide implementation process. So I provide guidance to the leadership team on planning developmentally appropriate ways to respond to challenging behaviors by helping reduce suspension and expulsion. We're also here to work with the school behavior support coaches on using PTR-YC, which is prevent, teach, reinforce for young children, to help facilitate team-based interventions to support children, families, and teachers. So I know many of you are familiar with the pyramid model. I want you to think back to the overview you received when we did our buy-in session. As your school looked at pyramid-wide program implementation, when we look at the pyramid, we have our universal promotion, which is for all, and that is nurturing responsive relationships and high quality supportive environments. Then we move into the secondary prevention strategies, which are focused at target social emotional supports. And then finally, we look at intensive interventions. And all of this is built on the framework, or not the framework, but the base of the effective workforce. And that is you, that is the policies and procedures, that's the training and knowledge you bring to the table. So as the work that we do is always centered on the pyramid model. And while the Behavior Support Network focuses on the top of the pyramid, intensive interventions, we want to help build the base of the pyramid model as well. And if we start at the top, we know a pyramid falls over. So we want to really shore up that framework and help those universal prevention and promotion strategies to actually build a solid foundation. So the 5 classroom-wide practices helps establish the foundation of the pyramid. And you'll hear me say PTR-YC. The Behavior Support Network uses prevent, teach, reinforce for young children as the basis for coaching through the 3rd level of the pyramid model, which is those intensive interventions. PTR-YC is a manualized intervention designed to address challenging behaviors for children in preschool. And we use this framework for positive behavior supports. And this approach reduces challenging behaviors and increases the desirable and positive interactions between teachers and children. So we're looking at the actual 2nd edition of PTR-YC, and classroom-wide practices was added to this because most behaviors actually don't require that tier 3 intervention. But we know that teachers and children still need support in the classroom. So they added this special chapter to really highlight what that is. And so I'm really glad that you're here today, and we're going to look at the 5 classroom-wide practices together. All right. As we look at the Behavior Support Network, I want to just briefly highlight how it is that we work with your schools. And so we offer 3 levels of support. We offer advisement. That's where we're having those general conversations about children's behaviors. We're working with practitioner coaches. We're collecting data potentially. But if we realize, wow, this really is a tier 3 behavior, this is a persistent challenging behavior, what we're doing isn't working, then we move into consultation. And at this point, it is about the child. And so we seek parental consent. And then we really hone in on how are we working with the 5 classroom-wide practices, which we'll be discussing today. And then we move into individualized behavior support. And this is where we develop a team and we work through the PTR-YC process and develop individualized interventions. Okay. And how do you access this support? Because we know challenging behaviors are out there. So what we do is an easy 3-step process. It is a request for support. There's an interview where we talk about what's been taking place. And then there's a decision tree to filter all that information through to decide which coaches need to provide supports where. So we know that this is a process. This is something that your district leadership teams will be developing, and they will be providing that information for you. So we know that all adults need support with challenging behaviors in the classroom. It can be very frustrating when you're facing those challenges. But what we also know is that not all children who are using challenging behaviors actually need individualized interventions. That's really only about 4% of children. So when we're talking about tier 3 behaviors, what is it I'm talking about? We're talking about behaviors that don't respond to developmentally appropriate guidance practices. The things you're doing aren't working. They're the things that interfere with a child's ability to form relationships with peers and adults. They have high frequency, intensity, and duration. They call for the use of individualized interventions to really support the child in learning new skills. And so we know that behavior is often identified by the person who's most irritated by it, but that doesn't mean it actually meets the tier 3 the criteria for tier 3 behaviors. In fact, most behaviors don't. So if it's not tier 3 behavior, then what are you supposed to be doing? That's the big question. So let's look at strategies that will help reduce those challenging behaviors and that you can use immediately. And that leads us to our objectives for today. As we look at the 5 classroom-wide practices, we want to unpack these prevention strategies that learn to promote healthy social and emotional development for all children. We want to look at preventing the need for individualized interventions. We're going to identify the components of these 5 classroom-wide practices from PTR-YC. We're going to use the pyramid model to look at how we have strategies to support the 5 classroom-wide practices. And we're going to learn about how to use reflection on a behavior support network observation form that is just a tool for us to really be talking about what is it we're experiencing in our classrooms. All right. So I'd like to know a little bit more about what behaviors you are seeing in your classrooms. So if you would take a moment and type them in the Q&A feature, that would be helpful.
Ellen, as they come up, I can call them out to you if that would make it easier.
Thank you.
Jenny, if you will use the Q&A button down at the bottom of your ribbon, that's where we're going to do these responses. Someone says they're seeing hitting, aggression, defiance, non-compliance, elopement. One user is saying, I'm seeing destructive behaviors. Another says throwing chairs.
Those are really frustrating behaviors. Those are some big behaviors that cause a lot of safety concerns.
Aggression, throwing themselves on the floor and pitching a fit. And then I'm also seeing adults who don't want to work with kids anymore and want them out of the school, and kids that are hitting, screaming, and tearing up the room. Yeah,
that's a significant list.
Yep. Yeah, I'm starting to see them repeat themselves. So
okay. All right. And that's why we're here today. We're here to give you something that you can hold on to, that you can start implementing in your classroom. You know, we purposefully are doing this training at the end of the school year for you, because we know you're on the countdown to the end of the school year. You're looking forward to those days of summer break. You have a well-earned break coming for you. It's time to relax, rejuvenate as you prepare for the next school year. So we want you to be able to think about the next school year. And I hope that these 5 classroom-wide practices will give you the food for thought on how you could start your school year off strong. Many of these strategies are probably already part of your current curriculum. It's not designed to make extra work for you. It's really here to support you in the work that you're already doing. All right. So the first letter in PTR-YC is P for prevention. We won't be using our time today to go into PTR-YC. That's going to be a whole other training. Instead, we're going to be discussing these 5 classroom-wide practices that the authors of PTR-YC recommend in setting the stage for positive behaviors. Most behaviors can be prevented with the use of universal, high-quality teaching practices. It really, really, really can't be said enough how important promoting social and emotional development is at preventing challenging behaviors from starting in the first place. All right. So here we go, the 5 classroom-wide practices. This is really the magic wand you're looking for. If you want to reduce challenging behaviors, these practices are the foundation needed to positively impact climate in behavior in your classroom. Sorry, we need to be intentional and regularly teach these by all adults in the classroom. It's not just the lead teacher's responsibility, it's the team of teachers. It's whoever comes in your classroom. We want them to engage in these 5 classroom-wide practices, and if they aren't working, this helps identify what children really do need intensive interventions. Some of the behaviors you called out obviously are those high-level behaviors that call for intensive interventions, but some of those behaviors may not be. Some of those behaviors might go away by using some of these practices. And when used with Fidelity, 80% of the behaviors you're experiencing will be reduced. We'll never eliminate challenging behaviors, but we can reduce them. So this loving little infographic was created by Brooks Publishing, and we'll be sure to share this afterwards. I know you can't read it necessarily, but we will make sure you have that at the end. Right. The 5 universal practices are implemented throughout the classroom. The expectation is that all children in the classroom benefit from these practices, and also those children that you're considering for the PTR-YC intensive interventions. When we want to look at these 5 classroom practices, we're going to do these before and along with individualized interventions. They go hand in hand. It's 2 lanes that we keep moving because all children are going to benefit, but especially those children who need them most. So let's take a clear look at these processes now. All right, number 1 is using a ratio of 5-to-1 positive attention. So research has shown that children are better behaved in preschool when adults spend the majority of their time attending to positive behaviors and not challenging behaviors. I know this can be hard because we somehow feel that we need to address every single negative behavior that happens in a classroom. However, we need to also remember this could reinforce the actual behaviors we don't want to be seeing. The climate of the classroom all starts with the teacher, and responses are really important. Building positive attention builds good relationships, and it lets children know they're doing things right. We go back to that base of the pyramid. Building positive relationships is where we need to be. And this often brings more of the same positive behavior when we're acknowledging what those behaviors are. So the 5-to-1 positive ratio of positive attention is also known as the piggy bank. It's a series of deposits and withdrawals. The goal is to increase positive interactions with children, give positive feedback to children at a rate at least 5 times the rate you're giving corrective feedback. So deposits expand on, the simple forms of praise that we often hear, such as good job, or you did it, or way to go. Those forms of praise don't really give enough feedback to children to know exactly what they did well. So when you're giving deposits, they don't require any response from a child. It's solely you. It's acknowledging the child's behavior. It's noticing what they're doing. It's commenting on what they're doing that you like. It's giving them praise. It's modeling. If they're doing a behavior, you're copying it. You're modeling that behavior back to them so they know that's what it is. When we move to withdrawals, those are taking things out of that piggy bank, you know, they require a response from a child. They're when we're giving demands, requests, directions, the usual no's, don'ts, and stops. You know, when we question a child or when we're using a loud voice, and those may sound like, you know, catch a bubble or give it back, or are you being safe? Or wrap it up, let's go. I've said this enough times. Classroom climate will change and be more positive when you use the 5-to-1 strategy. It also helps us realize, and this is important, that not all of a child's behaviors are challenging. It's okay to focus on the positive too. It's a mind shift because it's easy. We all have that child, I call it the Brian effect. When Brian was acting out, it was Brian stop, Brian don't, enough of that, Brian. And when you're looking at using a 5-to-1 ratio, you really have to change that mindset and say, you know what? Brian is building 20 blocks, towers, and he is helping his friends by opening the door, or he's able to do all these wonderful things that you weren't focusing on before. But if you switch your mindset and start focusing on them, you're going to start seeing more of them, especially when you give the child feedback. And teaching teams need to be really intentional about noticing positive behavior. Using counting systems can often help to be a tangible reminder of, okay, I need to be focusing on the positive things children are doing. And this can be something simple, such as having jars and you place poker chips in that jar whenever you've said something negative, or if you want to track your positives, you could track either one. It's what works for you. It's just reminding yourself to use these things more frequently. So maybe you're using poker chips. Maybe you're using rubber bands. You start with rubber bands on this hand. You put 5 on this hand and you say, okay, if I say, do a withdrawal with this child, I need to make sure to move all 5 of these rubber bands from this hand over to this hand during the day. And so it's that visual reminder. You might use paper clips in your pocket and use one in this pocket, you move it to that pocket. So by the end of the day, you said, okay, I know that I've made deposits into this child's piggy bank. I pointed out those positive behaviors. And also for teachers, I think it's really important, you know, place visual reminders in the room, especially in the areas where you know you're going to have challenging behaviors. It might be your dramatic play center. It might be your block center, wherever you seem to see more behaviors begin. What are the positive things you want to notice about children's play in that center? You know, it might be something, so your block center is an area that is, you're having problems in your classroom. It might be noticing that children are sharing blocks. It might be noticing what kind of cool structure they're building. You know, just talking about the positive things that are happening in there, giving that positive energy and positive attention to that area will help reduce it, because you know how it is when children are noticed, they start, well, I want to be noticed. I'm going to do these same kind of things. And that spreads, that positive energy spreads, and that changes your classroom climate. And it's much easier to address it, positive feedback prior to negative behaviors happening. And then you go into the withdrawal mode of commenting and stopping and take it away and no, don't stops. So really front loading yourself in deposits is important. All right. So when we're looking at these pictures, these beautiful photos, you're noticing that adults are really engaged with children. So making deposits might sound like, look at you walking carefully on that log and having fun. Or I see you drawing a lot of detail in that picture. You're really working hard. Or look at Jamal is swaying his arms to the music carefully so everyone is having a safe and fun time together. Or look at his face. Sharing your toys made him feel welcomed in the block center. You know, really building on those positive things that are happening in your classroom. And have fun with kids. Let them know they're being seen and heard. Follow their play. Follow what interests they have. And when you start doing these things, you're going to feel the change. You're going to have less energy in policing your classroom and more energy in playing, which are the things you really want to do. So when teaching, there are times when you have to give directions and you have to make requests to children. That's a reality. So just pay attention to the ratio of how much time you spend making those withdrawals versus helping children learn to play through noticing their wonderful behavior. And there are many resources from the NCPMI website available to help you acknowledge positive behaviors. National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations or challengingbehavior.org is where these are found, and we'll make sure you have those links later. But create special ways to notice children's behavior. This is just one example of resources they have. It's called Super Friend. And being a super friend is definitely a behavior worth noticing. You can be creative on how you acknowledge those behaviors that support friendships. You can use certificates like the one here as a Super Friend Award. You may know this as the Super Friend cape you get to wear when you've been noticed being a good friend. You can use crowns, you can use badges, you can really tailor it to what works for your classroom. It's also the acknowledgement that actions children are doing are helpful because they need that positive feedback. They need to know, what am I doing that's right? What is being a friend, and how am I supporting that? And most of all, announce it to the class, make it a big deal, and share it with families. We want to have those positive deposits with families as well. Number 2 is using predictable schedules. And you can see here in this picture, number 2 shows a little schedule up on the wall. And we're going to talk about that. So having a picture schedule helps to define and maintain the routine of the day. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have a picture schedule in your classroom. It only helps prevent challenging behaviors when we refer to it with each change of the routine during the day. It's not just a decoration hanging on the wall. It's something we want to be using regularly. We want to make sure that we post it at children's eye level and a central location in your room, somewhere where it's going to be easy for you to use. Because if we have it all the way over here, but our activity is happening in a different area of the room, the likelihood of us using that schedule is not very good. So make sure you put it in, and sometimes you can post 2 of them. You can post multiple schedules in your room as long as you keep them going at the same rate. You want it to be flexible. You want it to be able to show changes, because one day is never like the next. We have specials, you have weather where maybe you can't go outside and you're going to go to the gym instead. Maybe you're going to have a special visitor to your classroom. We want to make the pieces of your schedule movable so we can show progression of the day. And in this picture, you see they're Velcroed and they all go down to finished one by one as each part of that day is done. And that also allows for these special events that happen during the day. We want to directly teach children the daily schedule. It helps them feel more secure. It helps them to know what's happening in the day. It helps them to understand their day. And it only does that if we're actually using it. This also supports trauma-informed care because predictability is really important to a child's sense of safety. Some children will benefit from individualized schedules because following this large group schedule might be too difficult for them. So we can always individualize this as needed using smaller ones, putting it in a child's lap, getting it closer to them. But as adults, think about it. We use agendas, we use calendars, we use lots of things to remind us what's happening in the day. We can't possibly keep track of all the things we need to do and remember to do without having our own visual schedules. So we want to make sure that we're providing this predictable schedule to children as well. And so as we look at this, here are 3 examples of what some schedules might look like. There's no one right way to do this, but you can see that each of these, if you're using a pocket chart, you can take them out, you can flip them over. The other side, you can just pull them off, put them in a basket, put them in a pocket, whatever you want to do. You've got a more individualized one, which would be a first then. So first we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. It's really about helping children understand what's happening during the day. And so we want to make sure children can answer the questions. What am I supposed to be doing? How do I know when I'm making progress? How do I know when I'm finished? And how do I know what to do next? And we take this for granted. I think it's an interesting thing. Choose a child from your classroom sometime during centers and walk them over to your picture schedule and ask them to tell you about it. And you'll really get a feeling for, do children really understand the flow of the schedule and the predictable routines you're trying to establish? And when children can answer all these questions because of the consistent use of your schedule, again, behaviors in the classroom are going to lessen. Because when children don't know what to do next, how do they let us know? Behaviors. You get behaviors. When kids don't know what's going on, they're going to start acting out. All right. So our next practice is establishing routines within routines. So number 3, you see a little sign-in sheet hanging there. You know, that's part of a routine as you're in a classroom. So sometimes just having a schedule isn't enough for children to understand the expectations within the routines. So we want to break these down into smaller sequences so children really can understand it better. Most classrooms have mini schedules already in place to some extent, but children's understanding of them can be increased when we use visuals with them. So children benefit from routines being broken down into those smaller, more manageable chunks of time. And we want to make sure that when we're structuring support for goals, behaviors, interactions, and expectations you have for the routine, it's really looking deep into, what is this routine really about? If we don't teach these routines, we can't expect children to know what to do. It takes intentional planning and provides for important learning opportunities for children. So here's an example of a circle time routine. Everybody does something different at circle time. There's no one right way to do it, but this example says, okay, we're going to do circle time. And what are the components of circle time? Here you can see there's greeting, there's a story, there's a song, and there's a weather. We don't want to have to think about the steps of a routine. We want to build them to be predictable, that these are the things that regularly are taking place. And we want to define the developmental goal for the routine. Why is it we're doing these things? We want to provide opportunities to practice the goal within the routine. We want to make sure, again, we're using picture sequences, and we want to teach these in a fun way. So we want to make sure routines have a purpose. You know, why is it we're doing? Here's an example of what might be a morning routine as a child enters your classroom. They're going to put their things away. They're going to wash their hands. They're going to invite a friend, and they're going to go to centers. So here's a morning routine with a self-help skill, actually 2 self-help skills: putting your things away, washing your hands, and peer interaction goals. You know, there might be other goals you have in your routines. Maybe you have a math goal. Maybe each of these sections has a number on it, and you're trying to get children to follow the sequence of steps. Maybe it's a literacy goal you have. So when children come in, they go to that sign-in sheet and they sign their name. It's a pre-literacy goal. Maybe it's that peer interaction goal that's important. And so you're encouraging children to find a friend and then go to the center once they've put their things away. Once you establish the routine within the routine, you can teach it in fun ways. You want to make sure you teach it to the entire group, but then you also want to individualize it when you know some children are needing additional support to learn the routine. So how do you make this fun? What can you use? There's no end. Teachers, you are creative. You can use puppets. You can use role play. You know your children, you know what makes them giggle and laugh. You know what gets their attention. And try new things. So we want to use different routines with different activities, because we don't want children to overgeneralize that it's the boring old routine. Here we go again. But we want to maintain flexibility while keeping consistency in the routine. Really important. We don't want to be rigid, but we do want to be consistent. And I think back to, you know, if you have a child with autism in your classroom, they are prone to developing that rigidity. The same things need to happen the same way every day, no matter what. But when you're looking at teaching routines and you have flexibility, and maybe you change the sequence of some of these things that happen, it helps build that flexibility for a child, helps them exercise that. All right. Now we come to number 4, which is directly teaching behavior expectations. All right. All children should be learning about behavior expectations at the same time. This is a universal strategy. We want to teach these expectations before they're needed, so we're not caught reacting to behaviors when they arise. All right, so if children are coming to your class, they're coming with a variety of experiences and expectations about what it means to be in a group of other children. This might or might not match what your expectations are in your classroom. So again, if we haven't taught it, and when I say teach it, I mean every day, throughout the day, then we can't expect children to behave in ways we want them to. Remember, little ones haven't been on this planet very long. That is, a 4-year-old, maybe 48 months or a little bit longer. That's just not very long. And we still have adults struggling with behavior. So we know this is something that is worth focusing on again and again, throughout the day, every day. You may think children understand this, they got it, they know it, but it's still, they need reminders. All right, so as we're teaching behavior expectations, we want to teach them about starting the beginning of the year. We want to maybe have 3 expectations for each routine, and you can always add on to this. This can be adjusted as children become proficient through the year. We want to post these visual expectations. I always say, think of a speed limit sign. Have you ever been preoccupied while you're driving, thinking about you're running late or what you have to get for dinner or pick up your child or get them to an event, and you're just driving along and you're going 65 miles an hour, and then boom, you see a visual reminder of a speed limit sign saying you're in a 45. You immediately hit the brakes. Children are the same way. They get preoccupied every day as well. They're thinking about, they want to pet their dog when they get home, or they want to jump into their cozy couch and watch TV, or they're excited to see their mom and dad and they want to tell them about the fun things they've learned in your class. It could be anything, but children get preoccupied. So we need to remember that they need those visual reminders too. So teaching those expectations is important. We want to, again, do them in fun ways. All children need to have the opportunity to learn about these practices. You can do them small groups, you can do them in a large group, you can do them individually, and then notice when children are actually living up to the behavior expectations you have for them. Reinforcement goes a long way in helping them understand what they're doing right. So here's an example from the NCPMI website. So we can see here that our expectations are, we are safe, we are kind, and we are responsible. Take a minute and think about, what does this look like in your classroom? How do you currently use visuals to support your environment to teach behavior expectations throughout the day? And we need to remember, when we're teaching these, we do a great job at the beginning of the year, and then we slowly drift off because we think children know these things, but we need to revisit them regularly. And so we want to make sure that we're teaching expectations and rules just like we would do any other concept. We want to be really intentional. We want to concretely teach them and reinforce them. So again, here's another example of circle time. So what are your expectations? Here's what be respectful might look like at circle time for you. You might want the eyes on the teacher. You might want to use listening ears. You might want children to raise their hand when they're asking questions. Or maybe, you want to teach children how you want them to sit. Do you want them to sit crisscross applesauce, or are there other more comfortable ways that children can be sitting? So we want to look at those things and help children understand that being respectful might mean sitting on the floor, where maybe you're not touching anyone with your feet. How can you make that a visual so children understand that is the expectation of what it means to be respectful? And there are many times of the day you can look at how to use these. Now, not all resources come from PMI. These pictures here, I will admit, came from the Head Start Early Childhood Learning and Knowledge Center, which is a great resource on where to find materials, but they're still within the framework. All right. So there's other parts of the day. Again, if we're going to teach behavior expectations through the day, let's really break it down and look at it. There's arrival, there's snack, there's recess. We have a lot of behavioral expectations for children. And so we want to make sure we're taking time to actually break those down and teach them. At arrival, a child needs to know how to engage with materials, and they need to know how to initiate social skills. They don't come with that knowledge. That's what they're learning in preschool. During circle time, what does attending behavior look like? How does sitting in a group look? What about active participation? If that's the behavior expectation we have, what does that sound like? What movement is allowed? How do they verbally participate? We really want to make sure they understand that. And then centers, we don't just release them to the wild at the classroom. We have behavior expectations for them. And so, do we think that children know how to initiate play with others really well? Do they know how to appropriately engage with materials? There, is some level of obvious creativity you want children to have, but then there are certain rules that you need to also be looking at as to how we teach materials respectfully. And again, there you go. There's a whole nother sequence of behavior expectations you could be teaching. But when they don't know, what do we see instead? We see challenging behaviors. And now we're coming to our fifth practice. Some children need direct teaching of social skills to be successful in their preschool environment and later in life. So directly teaching these social skills. There's research that indicates there's a strong relationship between low peer status in a classroom and later problems in adolescence and adulthood. These deficits in social skills can happen for children with and without disabilities. They can happen for any child. And so having access to your preschool environment doesn't guarantee children are going to gain these skills. So it's really important to focus on teaching these skills. And so what does that look like? We want to intentionally plan what social skills to teach. Plan for how children can practice these targeted skills during your natural environments, natural routines. You don't have to create new ways to teach them. You can create them in what you're already doing. We want children, sometimes they will need to be given prompts or cues on how to engage in social skills, how to, interact with each other. And we're going to positively notice when these behaviors are happening, because when you're doing peer-mediated social skills, children are learning these skills that increase their positive interactions, and that also builds acceptance between children in your classrooms. It helps to, we talk about cliques and certain children click in the classroom. Well, we need to think about how can we help children reach out and pair up with other children. They need lots of opportunities to practice social skills with their best friends, but also with their other classmates that maybe they're not naturally interacting with. Again, just because they have access to a classroom doesn't mean they know how to build those social skills together. And so we always want to positively notice when children are attempting these social interactions. And remember, having friends is that natural reinforcer. We all want to have friends. We thrive off of that. We need that, and children need that too. All right. So here we see that we have two little girls. I want you to think about what are things you do in the classroom for children. And are some of those things children can actually work together to do for themselves? Can you have job helpers? I know, that's one of the usual requirements. You have to have jobs for children to do. And maybe you have a classroom of 18 children. That's a lot of jobs to think of. And if we want to really create meaningful jobs, are there 18 meaningful jobs in your room? That's a stretch to try and find that. But you can create job teams where you have 2 or 3 children working together and doing a job. That's a meaningful job in the classroom. So let's look at what we can do. What are some ideas? You can monitor centers, you can set up the lunch table, you can feed the class pet, you can lead morning greeting. There's a lot of things that happen during the day naturally that you can put pairs of children together and they can do those activities. And again, with all new learning, we want lots of practice. And so thinking about those routines throughout the day is important. We know there's lots and lots of skills, social skills that children need to learn, things like how do you get a child's attention? If we looked at that previous picture, it was teaching someone how to tap a child on the shoulder to get their attention. Not all children know that. How do you ask for toys? How do you take turns? How do you problem solve? How do you give compliments to a friend? Or how about play organizers? There are those strong personalities in your classroom who go in and they say, you're going to do this and you're going to do this and I'm going to do this. And they are natural play organizers. And you have other children who are quiet and stand by the side and they don't really know what to do. And that's a child that obviously can use additional support. And again, you might help cue them into what they're doing. But here we go, NCPMI or challengingbehavior.org has lots of resources. So we talked about problem solving. This is one of the resources they provide. It's called the Solution Kit. And it's a tool to help children learn how to solve problems on their own. And you can see there's a card there in the middle and it has all these different, it might be, please say stop. It may say take a turn. There's lots of different strategies and these can be cut apart. They can be put on a ring. This is one that I say, hang lots of them on the room. We talked about using your daily schedule and making sure that's in a prominent place. Well, the Solution Kit needs to be everywhere because problems occur all over the classroom. And when these are actually used and children become proficient in them, it's not uncommon for teachers to say, the kids don't need me because they're really flowing along and they're able to solve those problems that come up. But you want to start in the beginning of the school year by teaching, 1 to 3 of these solutions, and then you build it as children gain confidence. Or maybe you're the kind of person who likes checklists. And so on the NCPMI website, there are practice implementation checklists, and they go through and, here one list talks about friendship skills. Are you doing these things? Check, check, check. Or emotional literacy skills or problem solving skills. The direct teaching of these skills, you don't have to think about what skills do I need to teach if, we've got some help and some strategies here to get you started. All right. So as we've talked about the 5 classroom-wide practices, I want to come back to the pyramid and I want you to see how they align. So we talked about the ratio of 5-to-1 positive attention. We talked about predictable schedules and we talked about routines within routines. And you can clearly see those align with that foundational blue level. All children need to be working on these. But then we also talked about teaching peer-mediated social skills and teaching behavioral expectations. And I colored those green because they go right along with that secondary step of, are we looking at teaching those social skills as targeted social skills for children, where some children get those naturally, but some children need additional support. So here's the catch. When we're using the 5 classroom-wide practices, the target is to hit implementation with 80% fidelity on our worst days. We know teachers, you are tired, you are stressed, you get preoccupied, and we know it's important to take teacher care and self-care seriously because there's no way we can hit these practices unless we focus on meeting our needs first. You can't pour from an empty cup. And on our best days, we want to hit these 5 classroom-wide expectations at 80 to 100%, the days when you're feeling energetic and happy and fulfilled, it's really important. So if you can hit 80% on your worst days, then you can hit those higher percentages. But it's tempting to let some of those strategies go as the year progresses. It's like, no, I don't have capacity or energy for this, and I let it go. But we need to remember, children also need these strategies on their best days and their worst days. And when you have a classroom of 18 or more little personalities, that means we want to make sure that we're doing these with the highest fidelity possible. So take a breath. Anybody feeling like an 80s party? I think of Madonna's song Borderline, and it's hard to deal with challenging behaviors, living day in, day out with them. You might feel like children have gotten the best of you, but if you use these 5 classroom-wide practices, it will make an impact in your classroom environment. You will see those behaviors decrease. These practices aren't hard to use, but they take practice and they take support, because we say, yes, we know we're doing some of them. And then others were like, I'm lost. I can't even get this off the ground. So what do we do to get from using them with high fidelity? How do we get there? We know what to do. And how do we move it to actually doing it? In come the horses. It takes coaching, and not this kind of coaching, though I could drive that horse and buggy. That's actually one of my hobbies. Coaching isn't punitive. It's not gotcha. It's not meant to be gossip. It's meant to be an extra set of eyes in the classroom. It's meant to be support to help you reflect on your teaching practices. It's structured in a way to give positive feedback on what's really going well and provide support to talk through what goals do you have for yourself? What things are challenging you in the classroom? Most importantly, it just is, you're not alone. You're not alone in your classroom. Your schools are going to be assigned practitioner coaches and behavior coaches that are there to support you. It is a process that's how we get those 5 classroom-wide practices going. And BSN has created a tool to help this process. So this form was created to be looking at the 5 classroom-wide practices to improve behavior. This is simply a tally sheet that we use to identify strengths in the classroom. We're looking at what deposits are you making that are supporting those strategies, and then maybe what withdrawals have you made that are not allowing those strategies to work well for you. And so we're going to look at an example of what this could look like. All right, so this is just a highlighted scenario from that form. And you can see we're looking at teaching behavior expectations. And we say, okay, how often was a deposit being made? We saw this twice. And how often were withdrawals being made? There were 3. And what did that look like? What did that sound like? So in this situation, it was a teacher that was in a high stress state due to the challenging behaviors, the unsafe behaviors happening in her room. And we know those exist because you named those off in the beginning. So over a 2-hour observation that was happening by this coach and this teacher, they were focusing on this teacher was really trying to control what was happening in the classroom. She was trying to increase everyone's safety by focusing on teaching these behavior expectations in the moment. And so the example is, Sarah, it's not okay to throw toys, or stop running in the classroom, or we do not hit in this classroom. These were examples of things that this teacher happened to say when she was frustrated. And you can see those were the 4 little things she said. And those are things that, if we're honest, we may have all said as a teacher in the classroom. They're the natural things that come out of our mouth because we want to ensure we have a safe classroom. So I want you to pause for a minute. I want you to think, what does this look like in your own classroom? If you were filling this out on yourself, where do you think you would be? Have you ever found yourself there just being reactive? I know I have. And so this allows us to think about, okay, if we want to be making more deposits, if we want to be using more of these strategies at higher fidelity, now let's have a conversation about, what does that look like? What do we need to make that happen? And this is where teachers are empowered, because teachers, the things that you want to work on. And this is all about empowering you to make decisions for yourself. You are so busy in the classroom, you probably don't hear or see a good portion of the things you're actually doing, because you're working on the care and education pieces all of the time. So when we're using this, behavior is an adult issue, and it is greatly impacted by teacher interactions, and it looks at the classroom environment. That classroom environment is set up by how we respond to behaviors. So this is an observation tool. We're not looking at the behavior of the children. We're looking at teacher practices and teacher interactions. These are the foundational levels of the pyramid, those nurturing and responsive relationships, along with those high quality supportive environments. We want to make sure that we have a solid foundation, and that's going to prevent the chaos and the challenging behaviors. So what are we seeing? Classrooms, I know you're using these 5 classroom-wide practices to some extent. You are experienced teachers, you have education, you've done this, you've seen this. And I'm sure you're using these now, but when observing your classroom for these practices, I want you to look carefully at each one. As you're going throughout your day, I want you to think about each one. And are we using them with enough consistency, enough frequency to really get to fidelity? Are you consistently hitting that 80 to 100%? The purpose of observation is always to support the teacher. That's what this is about. It's about support. So how do we set teaching teams up for success? How do we set teachers up to be able to do these things? Because it's a lot. They sounded like 5 simple things, but they're 5 simple things that go into depth. So everyone in that classroom needs to know what the 5 classroom-wide practices are and feel comfortable implementing them. It's a team process. It's not just on one person, it's on everyone. And again, be creative, make them fun for you to use. If you've made tools, create them so that they match your personality and they match what the theme of your classroom is. They're not just pretty decorations, but they actually impact positive behavior in children. Be consistent and teach them throughout the day with lots of time for practicing. We've said that for each of these strategies: practice, practice, practice. Post visual reminders for adults around the room, because let's face it, we get preoccupied and we need that speed limit sign sometimes to remind us this is what we want to focus on doing. And hanging something in your room can help give you that extra support you need. We want to celebrate those successes. When you do these things and you see that behavior shift, that's a success. And remember, change takes time. Keep trying. Don't give up on them prematurely. No one hits 80 to 100% implementation right out the gate. That is a high goal, and that goal takes time. No one is expecting that next week, next month. It takes time. And so we also want to look up, how do we set children up for success with the 5 classroom-wide practices? We want to make sure we're teaching them throughout the day in those natural environments during your natural routines. We want to make sure that as adults, we're modeling these practices with each other, that, social skills are taught, but they're also caught. And so giving children lots of opportunities to see those things happening. We want to use consistent language and concrete examples of social skills. That's why it takes intentional planning. It takes a conversation between the team so that we can make sure we're giving children a consistent message. And we want to involve parents in that too, because we want this to be at home and at school when possible. Again, lots of opportunities to practice, and we want to notice and comment and when children are doing these social skills, when they're doing them right. They need to know that they're doing the right things. Children thrive on positive acknowledgement when they're noticed. All right. So when the 5 classroom-wide practices are in place, why are they so important? Why am I taking this time? It does several things. It helps us identify who needs intensive interventions, because when you're doing these things and you're still struggling with these big behaviors, it's time to move on. It's time to increase that support. We want to be ready for quality guidance. Implementation of interventions involves having these foundational practices in place, because if we don't have these in place, as we're looking at developing individualized interventions for kids, we're going to keep bouncing back up against this. These are always going to be something we're going to come back to that need to be in place. And we also want to look at it because if we have a child that needs intensive support, we're going to go into that PTR-YC process. And the success of PTR-YC is based on the success of these practices being implemented in your classroom. We can't do one without the other. All right. So now it's time to take a quick reflection. I want you to just think about, what did we talk about today that resonated with you? Take a minute, write it down. Maybe you're doing these things, but you want to refresh your visuals. Maybe you want to tighten up your routines within your routines with a specific goal in mind. Maybe you never really thought about that before. Maybe you want to scour thrift shops and find puppets so you can teach things in creative and fun ways. But make a commitment to yourself to reduce challenging behaviors by learning to master just one of these 5 classroom-wide practices. Start with one and then move on and add more as you become competent and as you feel you're doing these things. Growth takes time. It takes intentional work and support. Build on what's already going well. Celebrate your strength and build from there. And if you're already using these strategies, look to a colleague and share the work that you're doing. So if you want to dig deeper, you can register for the South Carolina Teens Summer University on July 13th. We're going to be offering a session there from 1 to 4 called A Path to Reducing Suspension and Expulsion in Preschool. And this is embedding the 5 classroom-wide practices. This is a session that is open to administrators, coaches, teachers, but is highly suggested for coaches because we're going to go and how to use these forms more in depth. You can also visit challengingbehavior.org, or if you want to purchase the PTR-YC manual, that you can get that from brookspublishing.com. Right. So we also have several media platforms that you can connect with us. We're excited about our new recently launched Pyramid Pieces website, and you can check it out, and you can visit our Facebook page or follow us on Instagram. But I want to say thank you. My contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out if you want some support with these 5 classroom-wide practices, or you have other behavioral needs. All right.
Thank you so much for bringing us this great information today on the 5 classroom-wide practices. And I was commenting to Carrie on the back end about how much this would have made a difference to me the more than 20 years ago when I was teaching at first starting out at a child care center, and even things that would have helped me as a middle school teacher as well. And so I really appreciate the time that you've given and the way that you've presented this material today. I know we are over time, but if anybody would like to hang on, if you have questions or things that you would want to know more about, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We can hang on for a few minutes. And otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and great rest of your school year. We will be sending out all materials, including links, the presentation itself, and the resources that Ellen shared with you, probably tomorrow once the Zoom has finished processing, but you will be seeing that information coming from us very soon. Thank you all so much and have a great afternoon.